Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of this year's CNU Florida Summit. My name is Max Hoffman. I'm a member of the Summit Planning Committee and an intern with Rick Hall over at HP&E. And today we are kicking off with a continuation of the thoughts presented by Andres Duany on Tuesday, Building Types Post-COVID-19. We are having a couple of technical difficulties getting Andres on at the moment. So in the meantime, if you all had any thoughts or questions that you wanted to discuss following his presentation on Tuesday, I know we went over time and there's been some discussion in our social hours and on Slack. So if you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like to preload into the Q&A for him, if we get some Q&A times at the end of the session, feel free to start throwing those in there while we get Andres on. In the meantime, following this session, we'll hear from Ana Maria Ponce and Allison Justice of West Palm Beach, presenting on Complete Streets, featuring the new and improved Clematis Street. And lastly, today from 5:45 to 6:45, we are happy to be hosting the Unvacant Lot Social Hour, and we hope to see you all there. And I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion based on today's programming. And like I said, feel free to load some questions in the Q&A, and we will keep you posted, and hopefully Andres will be on in just a moment. Without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Andres Duany. As a citizen of New Urbanism, I heard his book Suburban Nation referred to as the New Testament to Jane Jacobs' Death and Life, Old Testament of urbanism. And his ability to enunciate abstract feelings we all held about our suburban environments was revelatory. His solutions came to be doctrine. But as he showed us on Tuesday, we cannot cling to old ideas in the face of a rapidly changing world. So with that, I'm more than happy to hand it over to Andres Duany.
If I may start, this presentation is based on the last one a couple of days ago, in which I made the case that the pandemic is more permanent than we would like it to be, and that the 1918 pandemic actually deeply affected both American urbanism. It affected the regions that we inhabited, Southern California, Florida, etc. And it also affected the architecture, bringing in modern architecture. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear all right.
You can hear me fine, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so what I'm going to show you is a series of designs, all of which, interestingly enough, or at least most of which pre-existed the advent of the pandemic, and I had the chance to redesign them. So they're very clearly different from what is standard with New Urbanism. Now, each of the presentations could take 15 or 20 minutes. I'm just going to gallop through them to give you a feeling of the way we're thinking. But one thing I would like to emphasize, which I didn't last time, one of the most permanent problems that we have is the conflation, or let's say the way that the pandemic and climate change work with each other to make things worse. And the specific mechanism that makes things worse is that the pandemic has really broken the bank. We were never, both private and public sector were not in good shape financially, but now they're in disastrous condition. And it isn't just the trillions and trillions of dollars that have been put into the economy to support it, with the zero interest and also with the several $100s a week that people received, and with the support for businesses and so forth. But something that has not been factored in yet, all the medical disaster has been very, very, very costly, and that has not been folded in to the situation. So one of the things that I think we need to think about is that there really is no money. When you have these climate change ideas, adaptation ideas, or these transit ideas, or these large government ideas, we don't have money for that. De Blasio is about to lay off 20,000 people in New York. You know, we're talking about that kind of thing, not just the 1 in 360 that died in New York City, but the fact that there's no money to do anything. And that actually involves two things. One is the withdrawal of government services. We're much more on our own to solve our own problems, both good or ill. And the other thing is that, and I think we see it clearly already, is the increase in social instability. It's not only in this country, it's not just Black Lives Matter. There's an awful lot of angry people, disappointed people, and it's happening elsewhere in the world. It isn't just here. And so 2 factors I would like to bring in as lightly as I possibly can. We're on our own for a lot of our own funding. We're on our own for a lot of our own security. And we're on our own for our own governance, for our own management. Okay, so let's talk about that as it manifests in these units. Okay, could we start? Okay, the first thing I'd like to show you is something that I've been talking about for a long time, which is something that Liz said, which is the one universal form of adaptation is retreat. You basically move away from trouble. Now, one of the things that you might do to confirm this is Alex Krieger at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard gave a very good talk 2 days ago. You might actually, Krieger, K-R-I-E-G-R, speaking about how Americans actually solve their problems by leaving England, by leaving the East Coast, by leaving the older cities, and actually establishing new towns and new suburbs everywhere. And so, and he did say this very clearly. He said, it's not just a matter, it's not for us to stem the leaving. It's for us to make sure that when people arrive somewhere, they land in a good place, okay? And he actually said small cities and towns actually have a future, which is, by the way, something that New Urbanism has been talking about for a long time. This little unit here, which we designed, is a tiny house. It's extremely comfortable, 230 square feet, licensed by the Department of Motor Vehicles, so that you can actually park it in a parking lot and you can take it away from trouble. You know, and trouble isn't just, you know, moving away from a flood. Trouble lasts a long time. You know, to rebuild your town, just to wait for your insurance, you can actually move away with one of these. Also, it turns out that these are popular when you have disease. So we call them isolars, which means Spanish for isolate. And you can actually live comfortably in these, parked in any parking lot. Next. Here it is moving from Alabama to Las Vegas for the show. It's now in San Diego. I want to repeat, it meets the Department of Motor Vehicles. It is not licensed locally by the planning department. It is licensed by the DMV. It can cross state lines and they can't stop you from placing it. Next. This is a typical place in a parking lot, an underutilized parking lot. They're designed to fit in the area. What you're seeing here is gravel. So actually the asphalt has been subsumed under gravel with some of the pipes, and you can create quite a nice internal looking condition in some pretty miserable places. And there's an infinity of parking lots available in America that are not being used. They're perfectly drained. They already have footings and they're looking for a use. Next. By the way, a lot of these parking lots are also in downtowns, you know, waiting for the next high rises that are not going to come for a decade or so. They can be very sociable. By the way, these are not inexpensive units. They cost $70,000. They really are not for the homeless. We also have homeless units, but these are actually for people who have jobs, but in a gig economy, they may have to move. This is a more typical arrangement here on the left, where they sit on a standard issue. One of the great things is that parking lots are absolutely standard all over the United States. Next. So they can be leased. Now, this is a project that was finished and accepted by the city of Vero Beach. It's a very large site on the water, which has, they've decommissioned a power plant and a sewer plant, and we were asked to design a place for people to gather. And we designed it. The landscaping was very naturalistic. It was very ecological, lots of wetlands. There was a lot of, and it was all about crowding. It was all about how do we get people in festivals to be face-to-face, you know, and just, it was all sociability. Well, by March, we realized that that was ridiculous. I couldn't even make a presentation about sort of human density. So we redesigned it, and quite a few things came up on this. Okay, first of all, the pools and the wetlands, the wetlands became a pool. That very large pool at the middle is actually for the children of the town. Okay, those are, there are hundreds of kids, and they don't necessarily infect each other, but they have to go have a place to go. By the way, these are for you might say, the regular kids of the towns, not the rich kids. There's a sunny area all around it, and then it's surrounded by a grid of trees and palms on 20-foot centers, which, if you can imagine a blanket or a picnic table on the ground, it's the use of landscaping to separate people automatically with a 20-foot grid, which, by the way, is too tight for a tree, for a shade tree. That's why we alternate palms and trees. Lots of people can sit by themselves. Now, on the side, this used to be, you see the circle of small units? That used to be a hotel. And now it's a bunch of cottages, because the hotels are all dead. No one wants to share elevators. No one wants to share aisles and so forth. But the cottages, which is the original way of the hotels in Florida, anyway, are completely different market segment. You're on your own. You can open your own windows. You don't share air conditioning. So that's a new kind of hotel. Now, over on the back here, these are open market buildings. Some of them have a little bit of air-conditioned space for administration, but they're open market buildings. And you can see that the trucks can pull in not only for farmers markets, but they're multi-purpose spaces. All those 14s are multi-purpose. Over 13, there's a civic building that can be used as a wedding chapel or for City Hall. And what we did, we simply took, imagine the Seaside Chapel, but we put a big skirt on it, that allows doors to be opened. Okay, so it's all about opening. And by the way, here, number 2 on the left, we knocked down the plant, but not the turbine hall. This is a beautiful tall turbine hall, which is a conference center. And because it's thin and one big room deep, you can open it for cross ventilation. 16 are 2 restaurants at different price points, mostly open space, mostly outdoors, and they're fed by food trucks in the middle, so they alternate. And then over here at 26, we have sitting area. A perfect spacing occurs at 10-foot grids, 10-foot centers, and that can also be done actually exclusively by palm trees. Next. Now on the other side, to raise funds, there are apartment buildings, as you can see, they're on 35, which are checkerboard. They're just 4 apartments to the floor. There's almost no lobby space. There's no elevator. There are walk-ups. I'll show you the plans later. And every one of them has cross ventilation. And the parking lots are actually turned into courts. You can see those courts, but they're not aligned. They don't share party walls. There's a single means of egress. Over on that circular part, those are 2 water tanks that are empty. Clean water tanks. We put an awning across it as an open air stage. And instead of having people sitting and keeping them apart, those are all little picnic tables. I think the great tool of urbanism is going to be the picnic table. Sits up to 6, it can't be moved. So actually the spacing is automatic. So here you sit 6 at a time for picnic tables. By the way, if you put a footing on it and it's a really good concert, you can actually dance on the table. That's another thing that's pretty cool. On the side, there was they wanted to have an arts, visiting art group. And so what you see here are the thin houses are 2-bedroom, essentially mobile homes, but nicely designed. And in the back, just like Chautauqua, New York, there are the different studios for dance, for sculpture, for painting, for piano, for different musics, for ballet. Now, this brings up an interesting point. Like if we're going to have a 1-room schoolhouse, we're going to need school teachers that actually also isolate with their families. And this could be a typology, not just for music teachers and summer festivals, but actually this might be a school. You know, the teachers living with their dozen students with their classrooms right behind. Now for the rest, what you see are glamping tents, camping, outdoor camping, inexpensive retail, and you also see a lot of a sailing club. One of the healthiest things you can do is boating and sailing. It's absolutely exploding. Okay, next. So here you see it from the air. I think you can identify everything that's happening. There's the Turbine Hall. You can see the little hotel with the cottages. You can see how wonderful this grid of trees is. You can see the open air markets, etc. And on the other side, what I described, picnic tables, in perfect spacing, and the apartment buildings. Okay, it's a totally new kind of park. It's neither new urbanism, nor is it landscape urbanism. It's more like the formal French park with the bosque, the grid of trees being the fundamental element of design. And it's all about, okay, yeah, show it. It's all about light, air, and sunlight. You see here, here is the outdoor dining on a 10-foot grid of palms, works perfectly. You can see the outdoor restaurants. Next. And this is the old chapel based on Scott Merrill's chapel at Seaside, but it got a big skirt so people could hang around outside and French doors could really open. Next. And then this is a typical market building, big overhang, trucks can pull up, and a little bit of air-conditioned space for administration, etc. Next. These are the restaurants, open, open, open. Originally, they were all open. There was no internal space at all. But someone said that we, in case the pandemic did get over, we may want to have our own kitchens and not just depend entirely on food trucks. So we added some interior space. Next. And this is the hotel. And by the way, this seems amazing, but it parks itself, in those little indentations. Not only do you get little private backs, but you get terrific parking. Next. And roof gardens, roof bars on the top. That's one of the great discoveries. It's happening all over Florida now, bars at the top. By the way, all this can only happen in Florida climate. Don't try this in North Carolina because you lose half the year to the cold. This gives Florida a tremendous advantage. The COVID with the light, air, and sunshine year round, that makes Florida a very good place to design for. Next. There's the pool. This pool, I don't know what the precedent for this is, probably Venetian pool in Coral Gables, but it actually reminds me of a pool I had as a child. I played with in Cuba. It was just a huge, shallow pool full of children, and it had an island in the middle. Now that island at night can be a water feature so that people can also come at night to enjoy it. Next. There you see the apartment buildings in the back with the perfect ventilation and also the picnic tables in the front. And there's the school with its classrooms and dwellings for teachers. Next. Detail, glamping. New kind of urbanism, which is not packed tight, and the parking lot is used creatively. The parking lot is not always in the back. It's sometimes in the front. Next. It's like the forecourts of Paris. You see how they work? So there's parking lots with trees. The buildings don't have to face each other 10 feet away. Next. And here you see the floor plan. Almost no public space. It's underneath the threshold, one fire stair, and all apartments are corner apartments. Next. And this is what it looks like from the ground. The key to this is that the first two cars are parked in indoor garages, you see. So they're masked from the street. You really don't see the parking lots, and they actually act like very elegant forecourts. Next. It's a nice street. Next. Now this is a hypothetical town we designed for Colorado that brings up a whole lot of interesting issues. It's one of the places that might be a receiver town, or perhaps one of these towns that people flee to. I could speak an hour on it, and I have, but very quickly, what I want to bring out here is that there are different levels of governance. So this is a town of about 8,500 residents. And it's got things you recognize. It's got a solar field on the left, you know, an energy harvesting, and then food harvesting on the right. It's got recycling in the gray spots in the corners, and it has a central green, very open, you know, with let's say shops and restaurants, etc. Now it's got it's got 4 quadrants. Each quadrant has a green. That green is governed by the people all around it, and they decide what happens on that green. And it's large enough so they can decide if they wish to have their own school, if they wish to have their own market, if they wish to have their own whatever they want, sports fields, etc. So they can decide at this level of about 2,000 residents, they can decide what they want at that point, okay? Now, each of these little things, next, is the next scale down. Each of those is a compound, okay? So the compounds, so 8 of those made what I just showed you. 8, okay, it's 8 of those. Now, 8 of these, it's fractal. 8 of these make a smaller green in which a different set of decisions can be made. For example, that they can have an open air pavilion, they could have a little garden, they could, above all, I think they'll probably decide to have a schoolroom, you know? But whatever it is, they are funded by a portion of their taxes to decide at that level. Those are called clusters or compound. That's a cluster of 8 compounds. Next. And then each one of these that you saw is a compound. That's 120 feet by 120 feet, and you're allowed to build up to 6 buildings. And so a person can decide to assemble their own society, you know, or household, can assemble their own household, their own society, their own village in such a way that is self-sustaining. For example, you might decide to have 3 generations, or you might decide to have 2 workshops, or and house your workers, you know, 2 or 3 people that are great carpenters, you know, working on your mill shop and so forth, or a couple of people to protect you, you know, young people that can actually are tough guys or tough girls, and you can, you know, and people to take care of your grandmother, you know, caregivers. But the idea is that the compound in the future becomes the fundamental dwelling. The other thing that comes up here is the garage actually becomes the front. Okay, if you go, let's see the next image. See this image here, okay? So what you're seeing is a walkway. Okay, there are really no streets. What you have are walkways that connect to each other, as you can see there, but also the garages face the alleys. And those garages are those convertible places that I showed you last time that could be the workplaces or anything that you want. So this is the fundamental reversal of the new urbanism. This is a cluster of 8 compounds. Next. And here it is developed in an East Coast manner, you know, more East Coast architecture. This was developed actually for Oklahoma, for a client that we have there. This is what fits in 120 feet by 120 feet. And there's a lot of choice on these units. These are different programs that are being placed in this 120 by 120. Next. And here's the choices. You can actually select a main house. These all have different programs, you know, from a full house with bedrooms to one that just has public rooms, the second one. There can be dorms, you know, houses that have nothing but bedrooms. There can be garages, which are nicely designed to be convertible to other things. You can have retreats, you know, places where you can store your groceries for all the dwellings, places where you can retreat to be yourself to work, places that can be small schoolhouses or workshops. And then finally, you can have a bit of a recreational place that's shared. Of course, everybody has a porch, but you can have a place that's a pavilion with a pool. And you get to select these, and you can see you actually are taken through this piece by piece. And then there's a couple of kinds of lots. Next. Okay, so this is what they're like. This is one that has 3 master bedrooms, just to give you a feeling for it. It's one of the main houses. Next. This is a house that has no bedrooms at all. It's a house that's designed to be just the center of the whole compound. No one lives in it. It just has big, you know, big screen, big eating, big kitchen. Next. This is what we call dorms, just these places where you can very inexpensively buy additional beds. They're dependent upon going elsewhere for your meals. Next. And then these are the garages, which I think are fundamentally important, as you've heard me say. Next. These are the various retreats, little places on the right. That's a writer's place, you see. I've seen, that's John Updike used to have one of those. And this is a larder on the left, and this is a classroom. But there are many others possible. And they each have a price. Next. And then these are the pavilions, in this case associated with pools. Next. And so you're taken through it. Step one, choose your main house. And so the potential resident chooses house 2. And they know it costs it's 1,400 square feet, costs 182,000. They know the program. Okay, and you take step 2, step 3, step 4. You get taken through every one of those types, and you assemble your society. So here's what these people chose. They chose your main house. They chose 2 dorms, which you can see there. They chose both garage types. They wanted 5 of them. They chose retreats, and they chose the large pavilion. Then you assemble them into the 120 by 120 compound. So this is the fundamental element of society. It's not just the household. What happens now is that there's nothing between your dwelling and City Hall. Like if Liz and I want to do something in our house or in our, let's say, our street frontage, it has to be done at the level of City Hall, and it has to become generally applicable to all of Coral Gables, which is to say it's impossible. But there's a series of decisions that should be made in a subsidiary form. Okay? The compound makes a series of decisions. The cluster makes a series of decisions. The pod makes a series of decisions. And then some decisions are made at the level of City Hall. And this is an extraordinarily important, this kind of programming is extraordinarily important, I think, in the future. It should already be happening anyway. Next. And so the inside is like this, very standardized details to include, to make things easy to build and to price them properly. Next. That's the big house. Notice, by the way, that the compounds tend to look inwards. Okay, there's no question about it. Okay, that's an alley that you're looking at, but they tend to look inwards, and that bothers some people. Next. You see, these are the garages, which you see are very nice looking and convertible. Next. But there are entrances. It's not so much backwards. This isn't that different from first-rate suburbia. It's not porch oriented. The porches are towards the inside. Your society consists of up to 6 households, primarily. Okay, now people say, well, that's big and that's expensive. What's the smallest possible compound? Well, we designed this one here, which I believe is 30 by 40, right? 30 by 40, it's got its own internal yard, its own internal courtyard here, internal courtyard. And it has a very, very economical living and dining, living room with a screen, a TV that rotates or 2 screens, and there's a kitchen. There's a master bedroom on the left, no holds barred, and there is another one on the right, okay? But you can also, if you want, next, you can also very easily and at almost no cost cut it into 2 smaller bedrooms, okay? So now you have a unit that's about 800 square feet, absolutely secure. It's got no windows facing out. You have your own courtyard. You're ready to go and not bother anybody. You can have a hobby in there. You can have the kids run naked in the sun. You can actually protect yourself from marauders. Whatever your scene is, you can do it internally. Okay, now this is the smallest and cheapest. There it is. There's your little house. It's got a sloped roof. You can keep your own water. Very inexpensive to build, and it confronts the street with awnings, which is one of the least, those things cost $7 a square foot. They're really great, and they're really good looking. So that's what you have for your street. This is one that doesn't grow. This is just the kernel. This is essentially affordable housing for tough places. And by the way, the tough places of the future aren't just going to be Detroit. They're going to be tough places everywhere with migrants everywhere. Next. But you can also buy this unit. This is a very similar floor plan, but it has a layer on it, that thin layer that contains stairs to the rooftop, and also some storage for machinery. And the wall comes forward to enclose an area that can actually be a forecourt that protects your cars. Okay, so your cars can park in there. But the cool thing about this is that what that really is, it's a convertible space. So this is a house, as you will see, in which you can actually infill the front with the program that you want. You can infill the back, you know, there's some setback in the back, and you can infill on top. So you can create your own compound. Next. Okay, so this is what it looks like. There's the kernel. Okay, so there you see the kernel in white, and you can see what you can do. You can put things in front, you can put things in back, and you can put things on top. Okay, up to 7 bedrooms and 3 dwellings. I mean, it can be even more, but it's very easy to make 3 separate dwellings and 7 bedrooms. And that actually assumes that you're not converting the garages in front. If you have those 2 wings in front convertible, you can have 2 more dwellings and 2 more bedrooms, because there still is a 25-foot setback in the front. Okay, but look at the kit of parts that you have: garages, pavilions, and pools. You can have, you know, partial and full pavilions, little outbuildings in the back, ADUs to your heart's content, a whole dwelling on top where you can run your business from the upper floor. You see what I'm saying? Now, guess where this fits? This fits on a 50 by 100-foot lot, meeting all the setbacks. 25 to the front, 5 to the side, 10 to the rear. So yes, you can build your own compound in a standard American 50 by 100-foot lot, and it doesn't even need an alley. So compounds aren't just for the wealthy in Hollywood or just for the fearsome. Actually, this is a delightful and very flexible way to live. Next. Now, we immediately were able to deploy these ideas. This is a project we did in the Philippines that includes, in fact, it's very similar. I will hardly describe it. The only difference is that security is much more intense in the Philippines. Next. So this is the project. It's quite huge. It's between 2 rivers. It's called Dos Rios. And you can see the basic increment, the pods, and how they aggregate. You see the systems exactly as I described it in the Colorado project. In this case, much more elegant and much more serious about security. Next. So there's the compound, the block, and the section. By the way, the red line is the security perimeter. Okay, most of it is built privately. If you look at the compound on the right, as you build your houses, you have to actually be able to secure the edge that you're given in red. And 4 of them actually then secure that. And then there's an additional level of security. At that point, you can actually have a sereno. You can actually have your own, basically your own policeman, your own maintenance people, etc. So in a place like the Philippines, where governance is really melting down, they're really pioneering what might be our future. Next. And these are the floor plans. They can be courtyard houses or not. Okay, you see? They can be very large, they can be very small. One of the nice things about courtyard houses is that you can mix incomes very, very easily. By the way, the alley on the inside here is, of course, going to be the playground for the children. You know, that's where they meet. The kids don't play on grass, they play on pavement because they have wheels. That's what they do now. They love wheels and skates and so forth. So imagine this, that actually the pavement is like a square and it's shared by everybody. And by the way, it's highly overlooked. This is not our standard alley. You see the balconies and so forth facing the alley. What I love about the alley is that nobody bothers you about it. You know, the traffic engineers in the Green Book have nothing to say, and there are no setbacks required. So you can really design tight, intimate spaces. Next. Now, this is a house it's actually just a post-pandemic house. And it's really thought through for a lot of things, including not only working at home, but social insecurity. Notice that there's a new aesthetic here. This aesthetic is very close to a warehouse district. It's not the flashy, romantic, it's not the flashy aesthetic of I am wealthy of the McMansion. It's not the romantic aesthetic saying, oh, you're all welcome, we love you all. You know, this is our porch with the cute Victorian ornaments. No, this is tough, okay? We thicken the walls, you know, visually, as you can see, and it's metal. That's a whole metal armature. It's all welded together. You can beat it up all you want, okay? And so the entrance is also in depth. By the way, it is sociable except the sociability takes place from the second floor, for example, as it does in New Orleans. Sociability is not in the first floor, it's in the second floor. And notice that the aesthetic, it ended up looking a little bit southwest, but the aesthetic is actually above all, we're tough, don't mess with us. Next. So here's how the plan works. You have two cars. Now the cars are separate and the garages are extra wide because they're actually conceived to be future offices. Okay, and the reason we split them is that you can then you can turn one into the office and keep the other as a garage, or you can have two offices or one as a workshop. Be that as it may, the garage, they have good tall ceilings, etc. Now here in the center, those two benches that I showed you on the outside, that's a place where you can meet people outdoors without having them enter your house. And by the way, the sunlight comes in, so that's a place you meet people. Happens all the time now. Now there's a cleanup room. You see that? That's a room where you leave your stuff and you put UV light on it. You take off whatever you want. You don't bring all the crap into your house because it might be infected. And of course it has a sink. Okay, so you wash your hands and you leave the stuff out there under UV lights. Then you finally enter the house. And the house is pretty conventional there. It's got on the right, it's got a kitchen, right, with a booth. But what it has, the kitchen has a workstation. So people are working in their kitchens all the time with computers. Well, let's design it properly, you know, so that it's comfortable. So while you're cooking or not cooking, the electricity works, you have a printer, etc. Okay, and the booth is there. So as usual, there's a lot of sociability. Now you enter here the living dining. And here's the key to the house. The living dining actually opens absolutely to open spaces on the side for cross ventilation. Okay, these are nano-wall folding partitions. So you actually live outdoors. Your indoor is outdoors, but absolutely outdoors, and not an outdoors that's vulnerable. It's also not a courtyard. You realize that, see how this is reversed from the courtyard? In this one, the courtyard is on the side, on both sides. Not only is it good socially, so the kids can play in one and the adults in another, but above all, it's fantastic for cross ventilation, okay? Then you have the bedrooms. And now look what's happened to the bedrooms. First of all, they're not on a corridor. You don't share a corridor. Each bedroom is isolated on its own corner. So it's psychologically isolated, and it's designed like a studio apartment. You see how it has not only a bed and a niche, but it's got a full workplace. It's got a place you can sit, you know, and just read books. It's got huge storage. It's got a huge bathroom. So the bedrooms are thought of as small apartments. So if you're going to be living in not only a lockdown condition, but you might be living at home, the bedroom has to be rethought, and it becomes really a small apartment. Okay, then you climb up the stairs, next floor. You have it open to below, as you can see, it's a double height space, but the stairs come up, and that room on top is that flexible room that can be anything you want. It can be a gym, it can be a schoolroom for children, it can be offices or workspace, and that's where the veranda is at the top, okay? By the way, notice, see the opening there? That is above, go back one. That is above the benches. One of the things you realize when you make these places where you sit outdoors, the breeze has to move. If you create a dead end, if you create something like a closed porch that doesn't have breeze cross ventilation, the droplets or whatever it's called, the aerosols are still infecting you. So it's important to realize that wherever you sit, there has to be cross ventilation. So this open to below is cross ventilation, and over here next, show the earlier one. And this is all about cross ventilation, okay? I repeat, this is not a courtyard house. This is a cross ventilated house. Okay, next. Okay, now this is how the section works. You can see the garage is as tall as it's got a 10-foot ceiling. You can see the veranda, that's a sociable space. Again, it's good for sociability. You have a lot of roof, by the way. And that might be, I don't mind flat roofs because there might be, if things get really tough, you might need to locate your own solar panels because electricity may get to be sporadic. Next. Here's the section. It's really pretty sociable. Here you see the cross ventilation you see of the entry space. Next. And this is what it looks like on the outside. You know, there's some fabulous garage doors now. They look like that. And by the way, they meet hurricane code. So they're very hard to break. You know, they're not your usual storefront. Next. And they stack as usual with, you know, DPZ is very careful with our privacy situation and with our density. And it wastes very little space. By the way, it meets all the codes or most of the code requirements. But you can see that there's an urbanism implied in this as well. It's not bad. Next. And this is the street space. I can't tell you, go back one. I can't tell you enough of the emergency of the warehouse look. All the cool places in Miami after Wynwood are actually converted warehouses. That's where people now want to live. It's the loft, you know, the loft look that was for apartments has now come down to the single family house. Next. But of course you can dress it up any way you want. This is for Windsor. If Windsor wants to build them, fine, we can get them to look like Windsor. Next. Now, speaking of Windsor, we've designed a new kind of live-work unit, and it's very interesting. One of the problems, there's a lot of resistance to live-work units, and I had the great aha moment because what the problem they have is that they bring the workplace into the dwelling in the first floor. They also discombobulate the balance of first floor and second floor because the workplace eats up a lot of the first floor, so you have to kind of half live in the second floor. Well, what would happen is instead of putting the outbuilding in the back, you put the outbuilding in the front, which is what we're seeing here. So the townhouse is in the back with 2 floor plates that are of equal size, and the workplace is in front, separated by the yard, which would normally be the backyard, but is in fact the front yard. So you enter there on the right. Next. This is how the plan works. You enter on the right, and you can either enter the dwelling or you can enter the flex space. Okay, and that can be anything you want, from a shop to an additional ADU to whatever you want. And then the courtyard, you see, splits it. So you continue to have a living room that has a yard, which is something that disappears when you have a live-work unit. Then, of course, you go back to the standard issue, you know, living, dining, cleanup room, parking in the back. Next, upstairs. And then upstairs, you have a standard issue, nice master bedroom facing front. It's three nice bedrooms, you know, good enough for adults. Next. This is what they look like from the front. So they meet the street with a single story. Next. And this is the section. Okay. Again, it's like, go back. It's like a reverse unit. We build these all the time, but we enter from the left. Okay. And then we can't really use the back because people can't get to it. Or we screw up the first floor with our commercial allocation. Okay, next. So this seems to be very conservative, but it's only aesthetically conservative. It's actually quite radical in terms of layout of the program. Next. Next. Okay, now this is an apartment building, and these are pretty radical. The thing about COVID is that light and air and breeze are so important that the balconies can no longer be token. Okay, they can no longer be these thin little things that we put in front that really, they're only good for sliding glass doors. That room becomes the central room. You know, it's got to be large enough for your parties. It's got to be large enough for your exercise machines. It's got to be large enough for your kids to run around. It's got to be large enough to walk your dog. It's got to be large enough so that the cat litter doesn't stink. It's got to be, you know, you have to begin designing the unit with an outdoor space that's serious, almost like the central hall of a Palladian villa. Now, the other thing that happens, you'll notice that this breaks all new urbanist rules by actually being staggered, by being an echelon. Well, guess what? Every single street in the world has a primary breeze orientation. Okay, it either comes from the left, or it comes from the right, or it comes from the east, comes from the west. And this allows not only very clear view and very clear solar access, but also it picks up the breeze. Okay, next. So this is what the plan looks like. It still maintains street space. As you can see, the sidewalk's at the bottom. So obviously you park underneath. And by the way, You want to have garage doors in your parking, you know, for yourself. You see the garage doors are here. The guests can park without garage doors. You also want as little as, you see what these things are back there? Those are storages for package delivery. That's where Amazon drops the stuff off without having to come in or anything like that. Okay, next. Now, when you go upstairs, the hallway has to be outdoors, and the apartment, they have to be very few apartments, so you tend to not meet people. These outdoor spaces are, again, where you meet outdoors, so people don't have to enter your house. Once you do enter your house, you take a hard left, a hard right, and you enter the cleanup room, right? That not only, in this case, not only does it have the usual UV shelf and the sink, it also has a washer dryer. Apparently enough people don't want to bring their clothing into the house that they strip right there in the vestibule. Then you enter and you have a living room, which actually is primarily a media room. You know, because you don't really conceive of having guests. You know, it's all about how do I entertain the people that live with me. The dining is very large because you may want to have an extra large table. I know that Liz and I, we have guests with people we trust, but we actually sit them very far apart. We expand our table as much as we can so we have some modicum of distance. And again, here the kitchen becomes a very, very serious workstation. You know, mixing the computers with the kitchen. Behind it, we have a flex space. Could be, I mean, it could be a schoolroom, it could be anything you like. Big pantry to dump because we buy a lot of groceries now, okay? Now, then you go upstairs, next. And upstairs, you have a room. Let's take the one on the left here. Okay, upstairs, we use the fire stair to give access to a separate apartment. By the way, it's a skip stop. There isn't a hallway in every floor. It's very interesting. You know, the hallways below, and this is like a townhouse. So you can actually reach to the back without having somebody looking in your window. So that's an accessory dwelling unit. If somebody gets sick in your house, you can isolate them there, or you can have a caregiver living separately, or you can turn it into a gym, or you can turn it into an office space, as you can see. Then there are the three bedrooms that are as separate as we could conceive, and as many of them with a balcony as possible, and with that great double height space, that cube, which is 18 feet by 18 feet, which is an amazing experience. Next. Okay, and then on top of it, there's another in the skip stop. That would be the fourth floor. Next. And then the fifth floor, and the fifth floor is interesting because at that point, you should take every opportunity to have a pool and a sun deck. That pool, by the way, sits on top of the elevator and stair stack. So it's structurally very simple to do. Next. This is what it looks like. Look at the double height space. It has balconies within balconies, lots of light and air. That's a nano wall, you know, very large opening there. Next. And this is what it looks like. By the way, this is very repetitive, but it doesn't mean you can't have different architects doing different buildings on the same partie. Like these very large openings are very appealing by the way, they're very private. One of the things the echelon does is the balconies don't look at each other at all. Next. And that's what it looks like from the ground. You can imagine easily having lots of very appealing parties there. Next. Now, you may want to have a more conventional double-sided apartment building. That's also possible. Next. 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 Okay, and here what you do is you have two courtyard buildings. Essentially, they're two C-shaped buildings, right? So you actually have the great outdoor spaces. It's like stacking villas. Next. There they are. Actually, this is surprisingly simple to build. There's very little articulation in it. You know, it looks complicated, but it really isn't. Next. And from below. Next. And from above, this is what explains it best. You can see how you're actually sitting. The upper apartment is sitting on its own ground plane. And again, it's full of every single room has two orientations, and virtually everything has cross ventilation. Next. Now this is the last one. This is Okay, this I think is like this is a new type which is at the intersection of co-housing, co-housing, monastery, retirement community, and commune. Okay, and it's really for people who want to live communally in small dwellings, but also have a society. And this could be done at some distance. Now, this seems like a very big piece of architecture, but it's actually sitting on a 200-foot deep block. You see that distance? This from here to there is 200 feet. So you can buy 8 lots in any one of our decrepit cities and actually build this. We call them retreats. You can build a retreat like this. It consists of a series of L-shaped units with 2 large buildings, one which has a large hall for certain types of functions and one of which has a small hall. By the way, we've also developed these later to have their own pools. This one happens to have a pool that's shared between 2 of them, but obviously it's quite possible to make one that has its own pool. Next. And this is what it looks like. The L-shaped units are perfectly nice. You can see the 2, and although it seems repetitive, it really isn't. You know, there's the big garden space where the pool can go, or the little garden space, which is much more sociable. There's a really elemental arcade with steel columns, you know, kind of like New Orleans, very inexpensive, flat roofed. There's an administration building where actually the nurse to take your temperature can live. And there can be a shared pool. Okay, so this is the next. This is what they look like, perfectly private. Next. And the floor plan works. You know, just a little detail here. If you're a retired person, you can have your own kitchen and the food can be delivered from here. There's a kind of workspace where you can deliver pre-cooked food and dropped into your kitchen without people entering. And this is where the cleaning, all the cleaning and everything is. So this can be assisted living for an older couple. Okay, but it's perfectly good for a younger couple as well. I mean, it's perfectly good for a single person. It's perfectly good, by the way, because it's so lockable. If you have a partner that has dementia, they can live here as well. So this is a program that is not the institutional thing that looks like a hospital. This is, a lot of things I think are converging on this kind of communal. One of the most fascinating studies is to study the failure of the commune and the success of the monasteries in the Middle Ages. Very interesting typologies. Next. It makes a nice presentation to the street. You know, nothing that the neighbors could complain about. Next. And then there is, here you see the very inexpensive arcade. These are the two civic buildings, you know. Next. And this is the second scheme that has a pool. There's a pool behind this, behind that wall. And so there's a little space that's sociable back there. There's a little courtyard and a big courtyard. And you can imagine, you know, doing your yoga out in that garden. Next. So here it is with the little yard. You see the little yard where the little pool is. By the way, that's at the entrance. So you can really, and that's not only at the entrance of the entire complex, that's at the entrance of the 2 buildings, the 2 senior buildings. So this is where you hang out, you know, your benches and everything when you're in action, when you want to see people, and the other one is substantially quieter. Okay. As I said, the pool doesn't have to be outside, it can actually be incorporated. We have a design that incorporates. Now, one other thing, people ask, well, why don't the courtyards face inward? You know, why did you choose to have them face outward? And it's because the Carthusian monasteries had them face outward, so I just automatically did it. But actually then we have a second scheme that faces inward. And I think that is that's a real choice. And I don't know which way to go, but it's one of the things that we would, I think the better idea is probably to have all the courtyards face southwest to get the sunlight. So half of them would be facing in and half of them out. And each one of these complexes would give everybody a choice. Next. Okay, so that's it. That's not all, but it's most of the post-COVID thinking that we've done in terms of design. Questions?
Thank you so much, Andres. We do have one question in already from an anonymous attendee who asks, how does this concept of the tough, unwelcoming, though attractive,
compound dwelling unit fit in place in the South, where hospitality and features like front porches are so endemic to the culture? Will this be another symbol of modernity or pragmatism the South must slowly adopt?
I think that it's I think the new urbanism has to adopt it in its range of, what's happening here? Wait, there's an echo. It's not that the South or anybody has to adopt. It's just the new urbanism has to consider it in its repertoire. The problem with new urbanism is that doctrine, which was useful, porches to the front, alleys to the back, and so forth, has become dogma. It used to be a very simple way to design that worked, but now it's become so we can't even see these models that are in front of us. We can't see that the young people they love the warehouse look, you see? We have blinders on in terms of what's in front of us and the way the 21st century, what it's calling for. So it's not a matter of adopting it, it's just a matter of accepting it. And that's within our own organization.
So while we're waiting for more questions to come in, I had a question about the social norms that are required for living in a compound like this compared to the suburban layout, which a lot of Americans are used to, where you have very limited interactions with your neighbors. Now, when you're sharing a lot more social space, I'd imagine that just the social expectations are going to be different. What has to change in that?
Yeah. One of the problems that is not well known is co-housing. There are hundreds of co-housing communities. I went to Boulder, where I heard there were quite a few of them, and I said, "Oh, let's see a few because I'm interested in this stuff." And they said, "Do you want to see the ones that don't have a lawsuit?" And I said, "Yeah." Well, there are two. There are not. Everybody's suing each other. The problem with the co-housing with about 20 people is that everybody's equal, and so when you're voted down on something, you really can't leave, and you have to solve it with legal action. A compound is owned by a single person. Okay, there's a person, the householder, the principal householder that assembles the society and is actually responsible for deciding things. Yes, you fit, no, you don't. Okay, you can leave if you want, or we need somebody, the next person we need to move in is somebody to take care of myself when I get old. That kind of thing. So the compound is actually under single ownership with a lot of rentals. So it's like taking ADUs and just multiplying it. It can also be a business. You can actually run a compound. It actually is a really good way of having affordable housing and giving somebody an income and somebody who administer it. Now, 8 compounds form a pod, okay? And that is more what you're talking about. These are people who actually have not necessarily agreed to get along, and yet they have a public space in the middle that they have to decide about. And that's where you have to set up real protocols of governance, majorities and minorities and appeals and so forth. And then of course, these pods then feed to the quadrants, and the 4 quadrants feed to the municipality. So yes, at the lowest level, by the way, this town happens to have about 100 units that do not belong to a compound. For those who can't stand the idea, they still want to live there, but they don't want to share with anybody. And those are the ones on the main green. But I think we have to be realistic at how difficult it is to get people to get along. And that's why a compound is under single ownership. Well, a commune isn't, and co-housing isn't.
We also had a question from Mitchell Austin. He wants a little bit more explanation on the concepts for adapting to climate change that influence your design. There were a lot of really ingenious ways you incorporated black lights for disinfecting and social distancing. But yeah, how did climate change influence some of these designs with the compounds?
Well, climate change, there's climate change. This is a whole different thing, but there's climate change mitigation that happens at a very high level. Like California decides to ban gasoline cars, or there's the Paris protocols. That's at a very high level. Adaptation happens at our level, at the level of new urbanism. Like, how do we make sure that we actually adapt to terrible things? How do we get together and design a fire break? Or how do we get together collectively and raise our whole neighborhood? How do we get together, to have our own water, our own energy, our own food? We worry about pedestrian sheds. We also need food sheds. We need food sheds. I suppose we can now need fire sheds. We need energy sheds. We need water sheds. We need to know where our stuff comes from. Built into some of these units, not all of them, particularly the houses, is the ability, like a ship, to actually survive for weeks on its own hull. Okay. One of the things I learned that shocked me when I was working in Haiti is the number of people that do not connect to any public infrastructure. A lot that's not particularly like 100 by 100 foot lot, and they have everything, including their own water, their own sewer, their own security, their own solar, their own electricity. It's a different kind of very small scale infrastructure that occurs in countries south of ours, where things are not working so well, where blackouts are normal, brownouts. That kind of thing is going to happen more often in climate change. So I would say to focus on adaptation. How self-sustaining can my compound become? How self-sustaining can my town become? How self-sustaining can my region become? Because the US government, the federal government may well fall apart after the next election. We're facing terrible, unexpected problems of, we may not be governed by anybody, for long periods, not forever, but for long periods. And so that's what it's about. And I didn't emphasize that because I was emphasizing pandemic, but normally I emphasize climate change adaptation. By the way, not mitigation. I don't blah, blah, blah about how we have to recycle, plastic and so forth. No, everybody's taking care of that. There's 1,000 organizations taking care of that. What concerns me is adaptation, because that's well within the toolkit of the new urbanism.
I think we have time for just two more questions here. Rick Hall asks, what response are these compounds achieved by financial institutions and banks? And can we generate them as one of their limited numbers of types that they can fund? He says, hurry up, I want one.
I know. The first one was designed for, the first ones were designed for, I don't know whether I can make this public, but one of our projects in Oklahoma, you may know it, okay? I don't have permission to talk about it because it's considered like a secret weapon, okay? The compound, but I don't know how to answer that. It hasn't gotten there yet. I do know one thing, that we learned that you can have your own septic system at half an acre. Okay, and at less than half an acre, you have to connect to the sewer plant. And that brings a whole lot of trouble to you, a whole lot. And it's just like, I don't want to talk to traffic engineers anymore. I just want to design alleys. I don't want to talk to the municipal sewer department anymore. I want to have septic tanks. And so it seems to me that that's where that size of half an acre comes from. It allows you to have your own water, your own wells, your own everything. There are a lot of thresholds that we have to know about, within which we can operate and above which we can't.
And then another anonymous attendee is asking, can you explain why you expect the pandemic to last long enough to affect the way that we design buildings?
Okay, that was the last lecture. He has to see my last lecture.
Yes.
I spoke an hour on that.
Yes. And then where would be the ideal placement for a compound in the retracting suburbs? Would it be hard to fathom how these could be integrated into historic districts?
Well, what we're talking about here is something that we're in kindergarten. We have tried, as the new urbanism, we spent 30 years trying to get ADUs accepted. Do you realize that? Okay, the first outbuildings were the first projects of we were talking about them in the Seaside in 1980 has the first outbuildings. And we're still, Portland, Oregon is now finally allowing ADUs. Toronto is now allowing ADUs. I mean, we were 30 years ahead. What a compound is, it's actually the ADUs on afterburners. It's actually not just, and we say, oh my God, you can actually have your grandmother live with you. Isn't that great? Or you can have your own workshop. Yeah, that's great, but it's not great enough. Okay, we need to go right out to the full compound where you can actually do many more things than just house your grandmother, you see, or the kid that came back from college or whatever. So this is a radical extension of new urbanist policy. Actually, is one way to think about it. I'm sorry, can you remember the question exactly? Because I just wandered off.
Oh, they were wondering where the ideal placement for a compound.
Oh, okay. There's an awful lot of empty land in the U.S. in American cities. If you look at aerial small American cities, the Buffaloes of the world, not just the Detroits, the Buffaloes, the Clevelands of the world. There's a lot of empty land within urban areas, and everything that we design fits on a block. It also obviously fits on a greenfield site, but it fits on a block. Even the largest thing I showed you, all those apartment buildings I showed you fit on a standard block, 200-foot deep block. So what you need to do is find a place that you can buy 8 lots, 4 and 4 across from each other, and you can actually build one of those retreats. So that's where they go. They can go in cities. By the way, they're highly compatible aesthetically. I mean, we're not trying to freak anybody out, but they can work in cities and not. No, but the fundamental question that we have to ask is, already, if you attended the USC big 7-day conference or something, most boring thing you've ever seen, USC on adaptation, they're talking about sending areas and receiving areas. Do you know those terms are new urbanist terms? We've been talking about that. Sending and receiving. You can map the sending areas. Okay, these are the areas in which there are fires, there's flood, there's drought, there's windstorm. Those are sending areas. The question for the new urbanists is not necessarily to prevent people from leaving those areas, because that's pretty expensive. Okay, that requires a lot of money to adapt in those very vulnerable areas. What we can do is design the receiving areas so that they're not sprawl. Because right now what happens is people leave the cities and all they're doing is buying suburban subdivisions like crazy. That's what is happening right now. The suburban developers have never had a better year. Have you read about that? Well, why can't we intervene at the receiving areas? And this is not just, hey, let's get Buffalo ready to do this, or let's get Peoria ready to be a receiving area. What we need to do is map, and Scott Bernstein of the New Urbanism has already started. He's creating an American map that actually shows in, let us say, red, the sending areas. The areas that in 50 years are going to lose value. Not least because the insurance will be withdrawn. Okay, people will just get spooked and they'll go away. But where are the receiving areas? Where are those belts in the United States? Okay, those belts that actually don't have the hostility of nature. Where the climate's pretty good, where there's still water. And the new urbanists should have a map of the world, of America, that says this is where we should actually be emphasizing. Because the first act of climate adaptation is knowing where to go. And not just spend a whole lot of money trying to save the coast of New Orleans. The coast of Louisiana can't be saved. There was an article on it just 2 days ago. It's too expensive to say. I know it's very romantic, to restore the reefs and everything, but that's not going to be saved. There isn't enough money. So when those people resettle in Louisiana, where are they going to go? When we did the Katrina work, we tried to save all the coastal areas, but the number of people that moved north of the railway line and settled into new suburban subdivisions was really disgusting. They just escaped us completely. We should have been designing up there. We should have been designing where they were going to go. So yes, let's assume that people are going to retreat. By the way, I began this by saying that Alex Krieger, the great professor at Harvard of urbanism and a friend of the new urbanism, was doing a 50th anniversary celebration of urban design at Harvard. And he's been a professor for 43 years. And he gave a lecture about American utopia, which was fascinating. You can download it, GSD Alex Krieger. And it was a history of people leaving trouble First of all, leaving England, then leaving New England, etc., leaving trouble and trying to establish the next utopia, which was a utopia for a while. In utopia, Los Angeles was utopia for several generations. You know, Chicago was utopia for several generations. And I think that thinking that perhaps we cannot persuade the Americans not to leave, not when the fire is burning their houses and lapping their cars and the water lapping their cars, but we can persuade them where to move to. And I think that's our job.
Thank you so much, Andres. You've definitely given us a lot to chew on. And we have more questions, but unfortunately, for the sake of time, we're going to have to call it there.
Well, maybe you can collect them and,
Yes.
And have another session, you know, just just schedule something for the questions that weren't asked.
Mm-hmm. We'll be in touch for sure.
Some of this stuff is so new that people are kind of in shock and they can't formulate questions. But later on, so why don't you keep collecting those questions and we'll have another session.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I'd like to remind everybody at 4:30 we have our next session with Anna Maria Aponte and Allison Justice of West Palm Beach, presenting on Complete Streets featuring the new Clematis Street. And we also have a social hour tonight from 5:45 to 6:45, which would be a great opportunity to talk through and walk through a lot of the ideas that were just thrown at us. So once again, thank you so much, Andres. And we will we'll hear from you soon.